got a new book to talk about today. Vivek Ramaswamy started a biotech company. He is a JD, and he's running for president of the United States. Now, candidates, when they go into this presidential mode, they can say anything. And when they don't have much of a track record, who the hell knows? And this particular candidate is a very good talker. He's kind of the most articulate and just generally knowledgeable presidential candidate that I've seen in my lifetime, at least. So I was hungry for a little background on the guy and try to figure out the way that he thinks and how that might inform him as a candidate. So he wrote a book. He wrote a book called Capitalist Punishment by Vivek Ramaswamy. It's, of course, a play on capital punishment. It's supposed to indicate the dangers that are around what's going on when it comes to the capitalists functioning in our economy right now. So, as always, we will go through the contents of the book. We're going to do a little analysis that talks about how good the book is, just generally, and then we'll try to work it into a broader, bigger framework of where it fits in the grand scheme of things. And prior to that, right now, I'm going to give you an overview of the book so you kind of know generally what it's about and where it fits before we go into the more granular look at it. So the book really is about a mass financial scam that's being perpetrated on virtually every human being on Earth. ESG, environmental social governance, is a means of collecting a mass amount of wealth and leveraging it to empower corporations as political activists. So historically, corporations were allied with Republicans, with conservatives, because conservatives were trying to keep the government out of what corporations did. They were just trying to separate those two realms so that corporations had more leeway to do whatever they needed to do. But the corporations are so large now and multinational and have so much money that they changed their strategy. The corporations today are allying themselves with government and trying to use it as a means of gaining more power and getting the corporations to be more in the business of government, whereas historically the government would try to be more in the business of the corporation. Part of this is normalizing the idea of corporations being involved in politics. The means for that is ESG. Remember how weird it was the first time, like, a soft drink company spoke out on some political issue? They had some kind of statement that was related to something that has nothing to do with soft drinks. Well, now we have these mass investment companies or firms that own large portions of these companies, and they use that as a means of leverage to demand that these companies do particular things and force conformity among other companies. So the book itself is taking issue with the fiduciary duty that is owed to investors not to use their money for the purposes of the investment firm. So it's saying that if the investors give their money over to an investment firm, the investment firm has to have the primary goal of maximizing the investment, not furthering some kind of political activism. So to go into the actual contents of the book a little more deeply here, there starts out with a discussion. This is part of a section about financial scam. So there's a discussion of SBF and FTX. Sam Bankman-Fried, he was the founder or the CEO or something of FTX, which was a crypto exchange. And it took in lots and lots and lots of money, billions of dollars, and then would later give via donations to politicians. They would give tens of millions of those dollars to politicians after receiving tens of millions of dollars via Ukraine, who bought FTX tokens, and then the FTX exchange would collapse right after the midterm elections, after they'd given these tens of millions of dollars to politicians. So it was part of a laundering scheme to get a bunch of money back to the politicians. But the point is, this is one of many ways that these elites in the political and corporate world, one of the many ways that they are trying to scam the whole system so that they can benefit from it. So things that he brings up are things like that the less oil the U.S. produces, so we have all these ideas. ESG is based on this. It's about environment. And we have this huge push to make things more environmentally friendly, but it's often vague about how it's going to help or what it's actually going to do or how long we have to do it or how much it's going to expend. And the point is that the less oil the U.S. produces, the better it is for Russia and China. So Russia, in the direct fact of Russia being able to sell their wares for more now because there's lower supply. So they get to raise the prices on their product because the US is producing less. So it benefits Russia directly. And China is the country that produces much of the green tech that is used for a lot of these green projects. So getting off of American oil and taking Russian oil instead, or in the alternative, going and getting the products, the green products from China, so like solar panels and wind turbines and the other things that have to be produced for this green tech, those things are primarily made in China. While China is not following all these ESG principles when it comes to the environment. And in addition to that, BlackRock, the primary investment firm that he talks about in the book, which is a conglomeration of a ton of money and owns huge stakes in all the biggest corporations in the country and out of the country, they get tons and tons of money from China. So it benefits them as well, the better China does. Vivek references Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was one of the countries that followed these WEF, and WEF is the organization, the international organization that pushes this ESG stuff. But Sri Lanka, they followed the WEF guidelines and policies and then subsequently collapsed a couple of years later. That is a microcosm of what he's talking about, is that the whole idea was in Sri Lanka, they were following these ESG principles rather than following what the market was dictating or what they actually needed for themselves or anything like that. And what it led to? It led to the collapse of Sri Lanka, as it would lead to the undermining of an investment fund or your pension or your long-term investments just in general, if they're applying these ESG principles to try to do this political stuff when they should be looking after your financial interests. So ESG, what is it, really? The environmental social governance. So it actually has roots in around the 1970s where there was this push for corporate social responsibility. Now, the thing that you would think on the surface is that when you have corporate social responsibility, then it means the corporations have to do more and they have to help more. They're going to have to expend more to be able to be more responsible when it comes to the environment. So the things, obviously, that come to mind immediately are like not polluting a lake. That's the classic one when it comes to corporations, is that they don't care about the environment. They're just trying to make money. They have to get rid of this pollution, so they dump it in a lake. So historically, like rooted in the 1970s, it would have been about trying to get the corporations to be more responsible when it comes to things like that, or when it comes to things that are historically vices in the community or cause harm to the community. But what it really was doing, and what the corporations used it for thereafter for the next few decades, is expanding the idea of the responsibility of the corporation. And if you expand the idea of the responsibility of the corporation, you're expanding the power of the corporation. So now the corporation gets to say that this is my lane. This is somewhere where I can be. I am supposed to be engaging in these activist principles because you said I had some kind of responsibility to the community. So instead of just making Hershey bars, now I have to talk about gender ideology and abortion. So you had the shift. You had the shift back in the day where initially it was the idea that under Milton Friedman, the ideas related to his economics, is that the corporations had to profit within the rules. So that's what they were supposed to do. That's what they did. And it was better for everybody because they were enhancing the efficiency and determining the kinds of things that people wanted. And it was better for everybody. If they just, within the rules, they were trying to profit as much as humanly possible, whatever the rules happen to be. Then we have this idea emerged that's about stakeholder capitalism. The stakeholder capitalism meant that corporations would now change the rules. They would have some role in making the rules. So the things that are associated directly with stakeholder capitalism are things like taking money away from evil stocks, the quote evil stocks. So these are like guns and alcohol and tobacco. So if there was an investment firm, you would say that if they were being responsible, then they would take money out of those kinds of stocks because they were saying that we don't approve of this activity or this product or whatever, and so we're not going to invest in it. We are putting forward the needs, quote unquote, of society over the needs of our shareholders or the people who invest with us to make them money. It's just more important societally. But this has turned into present day, this turned into green smuggling. So now it's just anything that has to do with environmentalism and much broader than that. It's just trying to force companies into adopting ESG principles. And we've seen that, especially over the course of 2021 with BLM riots, 2020, whenever those occurred, 2021. You have the BLM riots and you have other things that are related to social causes, like abortion. But now the companies are saying that, okay, well, if there's a thing that politically that we want to accomplish, then we're going to force or bully the companies that we own to take a particular stance on all of those things. So something like BlackRock will own 8 or 10% of these massive corporations, which is a ton of money, and be the biggest shareholder, and therefore be able to push these companies to do particular things, especially when it comes to media companies. But the point is, it has nothing to do with profit. It has everything to do with a political or social activism that they're trying to effectuate. And it doesn't matter if it impacts the profit. And so what Ramaswamy is saying is that that is invalid. That's wrong. You can't do that. Legally, you can't do that. And it's just morally wrong anyway, and bad for the country in general, and bad for people worldwide. So there's a fiduciary duty, like in something like a pension fund. There's a fiduciary duty of the person who takes your money. If you're a pension fund that takes that money, or your pension fund invests in an investment firm to try to increase your returns, then the pension fund has a responsibility to try to make as the best possible returns that it can. If the pension fund says that, well, we have this particular political ideology and we're trying to further that, so we're going to invest in a particular company or give it to BlackRock because we know that they're going to further a political interest that we like, then that's invalid. That's not what they're supposed to be doing. That's not what the money is for. And so right now we have these insanely outsized representations of these political issues, and that's why you have so much push for particular kinds of political issues that have been deemed, the regime issues. They have so much money behind them that it just happened one day that these insane investment corporations and firms are able to use that weight of that much money to push companies around all over the world. So this part is scam. It's a scam. So one thing, it is imposed on U.S. companies, but not on the foreign entities of the same companies. So you have international companies. So the U.S. ones will get hit with these particular ESG requirements, but not ones in other countries. So it's creating a disadvantage in the United States for companies in the United States and benefiting ones outside of the United States. There were things like pension fund managers in 2021. They demanded that wherever their money went, they had to stop funding any company that donated to Republicans because of the questioning of the election. And Ramaswamy points this out, but it was totally fine for Stacey Abrams and the 7 House Democrats who voted against certification of the 2016 election. So it didn't matter. It wasn't the principle of election denial that was the problem. It was a political ploy to try to use the money to push a political agenda. But remember, everybody who invests in these pension funds, they're not going to have the same political ideologies, and they're not going to want to effectuate the same political outcomes. And that's not what the fund is supposed to be for. It's supposed to be to try to make money. That's the whole point of the fund. So then we had ratings companies even that were incorporating ESG, which is something that Ramaswamy wouldn't have known at the time because it's something that recently changed within the last week or 2 weeks, is that one of the major ratings companies actually got rid of ESG requirements when it comes to how they rate what they're rating. They don't use ESG requirements anymore. They just changed this very recently, so it's something that seems like a tide is turning. But we've had a tremendous amount of political capital looting going on for the past decade, and especially the past few years, without us really realizing it. Like, there was this one situation where the state bar had put out this statement related to white nationalism. So it was one of these kind of really basic statements that takes up BLM principles and suggests that there are a bunch of white nationalists running around and it's the greatest scourge on the country. But it's a state bar. You're required to be a member of the state bar. If you're an attorney, you're required to be a member and you're required to pay to it. So if you don't agree with the BLM agenda, if you have problems with that, if you have any political inklings at all that go one way or the other, it's not in the place of the state bar to make a determination and decide that they're going to use some kind of political speech with your money. They're going to effectuate some kind of political speech. So in that case, they had to refund partial payments to the state bar to the members who disagreed with the statement going up. And then you had pension funds talking about systemic racism. But all these things, again, it's just a means of pushing, of furthering all these political issues. And that's why it's so weird nowadays that it seems like there's so much money behind these political questions when historically it would have just seemed like these things stayed out of it. They had nothing to do with it. All these companies are just trying to make money. They just want you to buy their product or use their service. They don't care about any of this stuff, but now they most certainly do. It's because it's coming from a central authority that has a lot of money flowing around that is forcing them to do these things. And then there's a bit of a discussion about the energy crisis, and Ramaswamy has been big on this. I follow him on Twitter. I think he seems like a totally amazing candidate, sometimes too good to be true because he's so articulate, and he's not in the middle somewhere. He is really pushing on all the important things that people need to be pushing on nowadays when it comes to destroying the bureaucracy, the endless bureaucracy, and getting rid of a bunch of these departments that are redundant or complete waste and just increase the size and expense of the federal government. And especially when it comes to energy, like in this section where he talks about how transition that is being talked about right now is not to new energy, but to no energy. He talks about how fossil fuels are extremely important and they are extremely carbon dense, and that's why they've been so useful for so long. And there's this cult around the whole climate issue that is being used in furtherance of this ESG stuff and the WEF and undermining American strength. All these things, it's a means of establishing something else. It's not a matter of trying to create new energy sources because they're so worried about the environment. That has nothing to do with it. It's this cultish thing that they're trying to use to get more power. And he brings up nuclear energy and describes the fact, and this is huge, that the reason that a lot of the leftists nowadays and the people who are related to ESG, the reason that they're so anti-nuclear, even though it's the cleanest energy source and most effective energy source that we could have, because rather than the waste that comes from nuclear being put into the air and causing all sorts of global related problems, it's something that is physically manageable, that it's produced, and it's something that you can figure out to do something with it rather than having it become aerosolized and then everybody has to breathe it and it ends up in the ozone or whatever else. Notwithstanding all the concerns there are with every failed apocalyptic prediction that has come out of the whole climate movement. But anyway, the point is that he discusses how the reason that they're so anti-nuclear is because there are millions and millions to be made on underwriting renewables. So much money is heading in that direction, it's ludicrous. I just read a story about an electric bus company that got millions and millions of dollars from the government and failed miserably. It wasn't able to deliver a product or anything, but the people who started that thing just walk away with all the money, the subsidies, and everything else that they got from the federal government. Not only that, but of course we talked about earlier, China makes a whole bunch of money off of this renewable tech stuff that we're just now realizing that solar panels don't last forever. There's something that have to be replaced, and it takes more oil and gas to produce something like a windmill than it's worth over the course of its lifetime when it comes to energy production. There's another video where they were just burying all these broken windmills because it's not easy to recycle these things, so they were just burying them with a tractor. But the point is that nuclear, it's not that it's a bad source or that they're worried about the safety related to it or anything like that. Statistically, it's extremely safe and it's extremely effective. The point is that there are millions and millions of dollars to be made from government subsidies, and that also underlines the reason that there aren't that many dissenters. They bribe away any level of dissent when it comes to the climate, and the people who challenge the narrative don't get subsidized. They don't get the money. So anyway, that's the book. So moving on into the analysis of the book, Ramaswamy shows a deep and unrelenting interest in the particulars of the financial questions. You can tell why he's an entrepreneur. It's just something that he loves, and he's very successful. He's a biotech company. There isn't a whole lot of personality that comes through in the book. It seems like he's really focused on all the particulars that we talked about and so many more, so much other stuff in there, but he's so focused on that. There's not a whole lot of personality that comes through. Now, when he's talking, when he's on the campaign trail, it does to some extent seem like he has some personality. I saw him do, Lose Yourself? He was rapping Lose Yourself on stage at some point. He has excellent responses and he has excellent positions as a candidate. You always wonder with politicians how much is sincerity, but I will tell you, if I voted today and I got to pick who was going to be president, I'd vote for Vivek Ramaswamy. He's the only one, and it's just based on what he said and the little bit I know about his background, but the things that he says, he understands what time it is, he understands what he needs to do, and he wants to get done the most important things like term limits on people in Congress and just gutting the federal government and all the different bureaus. The FBI wants to get rid of it entirely. So much of that stuff is absolutely excellent, so he has a lot of very good things that he's saying. But, you can never know with these politicians, especially when they come out of nowhere. When he speaks, it's just clean and clear and thoughtful. And he doesn't mince words or concepts, and he knows the pushback. He doesn't try to toe the line and be careful about the way that he's saying this. He says, no, we have to get rid of the FBI. He says, no, gender ideology is absolutely destructive and not something we should be entertaining. So there are a lot of very good things about the guy. The book's very no-nonsense. Sometimes it kind of overtreads the central idea that we talked about, and it seems to kind of undersell what's going on when he's just talking about the fiduciary duty that's owed to investment, people who are investing in these pension funds or whatever. There are much bigger concerns than just people not getting the proper rate of return on the things that they're investing. There are much, much bigger things. And he doesn't really do a whole lot to tie that in. He's more focused on kind of the narrow idea of the fiduciary duty as opposed to the civilizational ideas of pushing a bunch of ridiculous politics with the weight of trillions of dollars. So, big picture-wise, It really is like the most important financial topic because for the first time in human history, we have these massive entities, these corporations, that are able to swing their weight around the entire planet. And that's mixed in with governments and with world-ending power that is seated in those governments, and a bunch of corrupt politicians, and a bunch of people who are just trying to work and like go to movies and date a little bit. I mean, there's so much going on. But this whole collusion between corporate power and government power, this is something that didn't have an opportunity to exist at this scale before. Obviously, elites historically, they've always had some kind of a line to whatever the governing power is. You know, it used to be divine rights, and then it was aristocratic. But when we got a democratic system, then it was supposed to be that it's vox populi and the people are the ones who are managing these things. But when you have this direct collusion between the machinery of government and the decadence of corporate power, then that is kind of the perfect storm of all the worst things that people could think of. And environmentalism is the cover. It's just the drape that they put over it so you don't see how ugly the thing is underneath it. So be extremely suspicious. For every 14-year-old girl who's sitting there talking about, oh, we gotta save the trees, just realize that is an agent of a bunch of extremely powerful people who are just trying to get money and power. That's all that they're trying to do, is trying to consolidate those things. They don't really care about saving the trees or making sure the stork doesn't go extinct. It's really just a cover for those things. But the whole thing is that it kind of tells us, because we've reached the end point of other kinds of government, you know, when it comes to aristocracies or divine right kings or communist governments or fascist governments. But this tells us that representative government tends toward corruption and international capitalism tends toward global governments and authoritarianism. So there's this cancerous spread of corporate interests that is just trying to eat up as much as it can, and part of that ends up becoming the government that's supposed to be putting those things in check. Corporations just realize that it's cheaper to have governments mandate people buy your product and be able to use slave labor in other countries that don't have human rights. They just realize that it's better to do that. That's the better way to compete with other corporations. And there's something that has to be done to undermine that incentive for corporations, mass corporations, to be able to do that. So we might need a new civilizational size approach to be able to confront this problem. It's going to take some new kind of structure of government. Anyway, that was this book. That was Capitalist Punishment by Vivek Ramaswamy, the candidate for President of the United States. Like I said, I think you should all go check him out, see some of his videos. Just follow him on Twitter and you'll get, or X, excuse me. Follow him on X and you will get, on a regular clip, you're going to get his positions on virtually everything. And he's very correct on most of it. I don't know if I've seen him incorrect on much of anything recently. He's had some other positions in the past that were concerning related to COVID. But since then, and after everybody came out of that haze, he's had some very good ideas. So anyway, that was that. This is read until the end. What do I call this thing now? Read to the end. That's what I call this thing. I really do appreciate people who listen to these episodes. I really enjoy it, and I'm going to keep doing it regardless. But I really do appreciate that some people get some kind of information or enjoyment out of these things, and I hope all is well, and I will see you on the next one.